The word this morning continues in the Gospel of Mark in the first chapter. Listen closely. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, and he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So as you have heard this morning, what questions come to your mind? Questions come to your mind?
I have a scripture that comes to mind.
Okay, I'm looking more for questions. I'm looking more for questions. I'm looking more for questions right now. Yeah. Hold that. Tell me afterwards, okay? That will be helpful. Yes?
What did they mean by authority?
What did that mean by authority?
He spoke with authority.
Okay. Read it.
What is an unclean spirit?
What is an unclean spirit? Some translations will translate that demon. What is that? Okay. I'm sure you're not alone in that question. Other questions?
Why would an unclean spirit be the one to recognize Jesus?
Okay. Why would the unclean spirit be the one to recognize when so many around him didn't? Okay. Other questions?
How come the demon knew who he was and the people didn't?
Okay. All right. We'll reinforce that. Yeah. So, those are some of the questions we have. What thoughts do you have about this passage and what it might mean? Okay, those are the questions. Now, what thoughts does that bring up for you? Okay, if then, what's the then?
Now I can say what I was going to say before.
Okay.
It reminds me of the scripture where we can cast out demons, but we're not to rejoice in that. We're to rejoice because our names are written in heaven.
Okay. So, the then is sort of, if Jesus did that and we're to follow, then maybe it follows that we do that. I think. Okay? What are your thoughts about this? Could be, these are thoughts, so it could be anything. It could be random. It doesn't have to be on point necessarily. What thoughts does this bring up for you? Gary, you look like you're so hard at work thinking in there.
Well, I just think if the unclean spirit is the only one that identified him, how are we supposed to, well, if we're not the demon, which supposedly we're not, how are we dismissing him? Is he right here?
Okay. Read it. Okay, so Jesus is showing his power, and the people still aren't quite getting it. Yeah. And this is very early in Mark. Yeah. Edward, you had a hand?
So it's how vulnerable we are to evil that surround us.
Okay. Okay. So,
It's be a model to be vulnerable to those things.
okay. So we too might be vulnerable the way that person was. Yeah, it's not the other necessarily. Might. Yeah. So watch out. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I just noticed maybe for the first time that Jesus was apparently well enough accepted that he actually was teaching in the synagogue. So
So there may have been something just about Jesus. I mean, after all, the disciples just heard him say, "Follow me," and they, okay. Yeah. Yeah, so he was in there teaching already, so he already had at least some authority. Okay. Other thoughts about this?
This is clearly in a first century worldview. Demons, we don't talk much about demons today. We talk about mental illness. We don't know what we're talking about. So, that's how we move from that worldview to our own and apply it.
Okay. All right. So for those hearers, those who were present, they would take it at face value. This is what it is. The more modern worldview would be, it's not a personification, it's not. But it's more metaphorical, we categorize things differently. So then part of the question is, how does this relate? That's one of the issues that it brings up. Other thoughts?
They talk about unclean spirits, and I think we all have that within.
Okay. Okay. So that may be more toward the question part. What are the unclean spirits that might take over us sometimes? Yeah. Okay.
If we're to behave as Jesus did, and we can do all the things he did, can we then call out unclean spirits?
Okay. Why does it have to be within reason? Why does it have to be within reason? Okay. So what are we called to do? What's our responsibility to those that appear to us to have an unclean spirit, though we might understand it differently? Okay. It's helpful.
In response to practice, and I've found this lots of places where I've gone, people just don't realize all that Jesus has done since the time of his casting out of demons. We have demons that are right there out in ISIS or whatever it's called, doing terrible things.
Okay.
And it goes on.
Okay.
Nobody's prayed with faith, I guess, and that would stop. It's dreadful.
Okay. And that brings up,
They're open about it.
yeah, that brings up a thought for me. It's easy to see the demon in others. And that's appropriate. It's helpful. Then you're in a place where you can try and respond. The other part of that, though, is what is it in us? May not be as pronounced. So those questions come up. What do you think, Ken? Is it smiling at
I
me?
like the way you said that.
Okay, all
Our
right.
body is pronounced.
Okay, yeah, well, couldn't resist. It's that demon in me, I don't know. All right, so, as you look at this, were you going to say something, Pete?
Pastor John Paul said, the Christian have to suffer, more than any religion. Jesus Christ, from the beginning, we have to suffer. We have to pay the price because we believe in Jesus,
Yeah.
Why we have to suffer?
Yeah, there definitely was the suffering issue, especially as we see the broader implications around our world. Yeah.
I don't know, there's thoughts and questions that are faced here.
Okay.
How did an evil spirit, a demon, appear to the other people that they could recognize? And I sometimes think of that as like a mental illness that was cured, but I would never think of a mental illness as being today an evil spirit.
Okay. Okay.
And I might think of someone who does bad things as being possessed.
Yeah, right. And my response to that is sort of, how can we see evil spirit metaphorically as controlling other people? Maybe that's the way. I don't know. But yeah, I hear that. Okay. What do you think is important in this passage? Is there anything important in this? I mean, it's a history report in some aspects. This is what happened. What do you find important in this passage?
I think that after he casts out the demon, people recognize that it's a new teaching with authority. I think that they recognize that it's different than before, and that it's a word that expresses quickly if there's something different going on.
Okay. So in this, they recognize there's something special in Jesus, and they respond. So the follow-up question for us is, are we recognizing something special in Jesus? And are we responding? That's good. Thank you. Others, what do you think is important about this passage? Or is there something important about it? Jesus has authority. Yeah. And it's more than just, oh, look what he does, that's nice. He's really good. But there's something about he is sent from God. Something about if we can connect with him, we can connect with God. That's what this authority is talking about. The authority is the authority that comes from God. What else? You find anything else important about this?
I don't need to talk a lot because I can't hear what everybody else is saying. I've got my earpiece.
I
But
understand.
anyway, is this the same passage, or could it be the same passage where Jesus says, this scripture is fulfilled in your sight today? You know, the gospel sometimes.
Yeah, no, Mark does not say that in this passage in it. He could have, I suppose. But no, that's a different context. Ken, you were going to say something?
His responses are really very reactive or just solution oriented.
Okay, so Jesus does not seem to be reactive. He seems to be active, but not reactive. That means when the demon said, what do you want with us? You're trying to destroy us? Our response would be, you can't say that to me, or no, I'm not. Or you shouldn't be in him anyway. But Jesus simply said, get out of it. It's not right for you to dwell in him. You need to leave. So it's an adult response. Rather than a child response, it's an adult response. This is how it is. I don't have to get defensive about it. It's not about me. But I will deal with it on that level. Does that help? Sort of? Jerry?
Does it also tell us that there's hope for someone with a demon can be removed?
Okay, thank you. I had not thought of that. There is hope for someone who feels possessed, controlled by a demon. Okay? Because this one, I mean, the image is someone who is totally controlled, who has no control. And if that's true, then there should be hope for us who have a little control sometimes. Yeah.
Kind of with Jerry, sometimes it's possible that a person might be possessed by bad things and not even recognize it.
Okay.
And so,
Sometimes people
They
can
don't
be possessed
recognize.
and not recognize it, or are not willing to allow themselves
yeah,
to recognize that.
Jesus is there for, even for people who don't recognize their need.
Okay. Jesus is there for you, even if you don't recognize your need. Edward.
Shows that everybody is not beyond that point of being saved.
No, there you go. Everybody, that means then, according to the story, no one is beyond being able to be helped. Isn't that comforting? You know, you may feel like the world's collapsing around you, but no matter what, no one is beyond it. That's part of what this story says to us. Jesus dealt with, it's like you give the worst example, the highest example, and so everything else fits too. There is hope in Jesus for each of us. Okay, thank you. So I was going to ask you next, as a pastor approaching this, what would you do to preach this gospel passage? Okay, so there's lots of stuff in there. How would you approach this passage? What would you try and talk about? What would be the point you would like to make? And it may be something we've already talked about. Because this is what we deal with each week, Braxton. What do you do with this passage? You know, you can't just say, oh, yuck. What do you do with it? So what would you do? You're pastor for today. What would you do with this passage? What would you say? What would be the point you'd make? What would be the question you'd raise?
I don't know, I think we can always hope that Jesus is there to help us. He's our hope.
Okay, so you lift up a hope that's there in that. So thank you. That's good.
Encourage people to ask for help.
Encourage people to ask for help. Yeah. If this demon-possessed guy got help, even though he didn't ask, if we ask, should be able to get there easier. Anybody else? Ready to preach this?
I tried to put the unclean spirits against the clean spirits and call it super.
Mary, can you get him transferred back?
I understand.
Yeah, that's. I'm sensing a demon here. I don't know. All right. I had a number of categories with things that I could have talked about, just in case you all didn't come through for me. So I'm going to set this aside. But I did want to share with you one thing because this always sticks with me and always comes back to me, and I always connect with this emotionally. So I want to share this with you, and then we'll have the offering, we'll have communion. This is something that was written in the Christian century. It was written by a woman with a great name, Joy Jordan Lake. Now, the only way that could be better if it was Joy Jordan River, but, you know, I love that. Anyway, she wrote this. Jesus makes me nervous. Imagine asking the guy home for lunch. Would you impress him more with a menu of feasting with Maine lobster, an edible version of pouring perfume on his feet? Or would you fare better slapping peanut butter and jelly on Stop and Shop's cheapest bread, carefully calculating the money you saved and buying groceries for the homeless family you befriended? It's that lack of ordinary predictability that makes me nervous. Other people have the grace to smile and politely mumble something vague when you make a social faux pas that sends you stumbling into the mop closets of their private lives. Jesus, on the other hand, strides in quite intentionally, and before he had so much as to set his backpack down, asks another guest how her fifth husband, or was he just a live-in, is proceeding in delinquent child support payments to his former wife. Jesus makes me nervous. Now, I read that partly to say we often don't know what to do. We're often faced with a number of possibilities. Sometimes they make equal sense to us. So what does one do? And I think the key here is, as it was with Jesus, to be sensitive to God, to hear what God has for us in any given situation, and to go for it.